May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This morning we hear in our gospel lesson a story about a Pharisee named Simon. Simon was essentially a man who was sort of caught in between worlds. And so instead of firmly sitting in one or the other, he sort of hedges his bets this morning so that he can see where this might shake out and decide where he wants to be. Simon was a Jewish leader. And as such, he was also needing to pay attention to what was happening with the Roman oppressors at that point in Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders were expected to play an important role in keeping the people under control. And if they did not, then the Romans would send in their legions to put down whatever was happening with the people. So Simon was aware of this culture of the Romans. It was a culture that valued power and a culture that valued authority. It was a culture that valued wealth and station. It was something that paid attention to what you had and who you were and how you used it to perhaps get ahead in life. At the same time, Simon was a Pharisee, and he was supposed to be one who set an example, one who led a holy life, one who paid attention to all of the laws set forth in the book of Leviticus. He was supposed to set an example through fasting and offering alms and offering payment and tithes to the temple. And so he finds himself sort of caught. And at the same time, he's been hearing about this Jesus fellow who's been wandering about doing miracles, and he's really very curious. But he's a little bit worried about what might happen if it becomes obvious that he's interested in Jesus. And so he sort of wants to get to know Jesus a little bit, but he also wants to hang back just a little bit in case this goes away. He would rather it not go. And so Simon invites Jesus to dinner. And there's a few things we need to know about this. Table fellowship in the ancient Mediterranean world was only engaged in between equals. You would not invite someone to your home for dinner that you did not consider your social equal. So Simon right away was at least according Jesus some respect. And we hear in the gospel he accords him a bit more respect when he calls him teacher. However, at the same time, he also is very disrespectful of Jesus in ignoring all of the codes of hospitality, which were very important at that point in time. It was sort of as if you had invited somebody to dinner and they came in your house and you basically opened the door and then ignored them. You didn't take their coat. You didn't offer them anything to eat or drink. You sort of, let them wander through and sit wherever they wanted. And at some point in the future said, could I get you something? Well, I didn't really make anything for dinner, but there's cereal in the cabinet and there's milk in the fridge. Simon did not provide the water to clean Jesus' feet or a towel to dry them. He did not offer him a kiss of fellowship when Jesus came into his home. He did not provide any oil or ointment for him. And so he really, at the same time of extending Jesus this invitation, is exceedingly disrespectful of Jesus. And yet he also calls him teacher. So Simon is clearly uncertain at this point in time about what he wants to do about this Jesus fellow. But he remains pretty interested in what he might have to say. So on one hand, we've got Simon trying to deal with a Roman culture that values power and values money and values authority and values order. At the same time, We've got the Jewish culture, which valued the law and valued hospitality and valued table fellowship. And yet Jesus, I think, reminds Simon of yet another set of cultural values. And I want to call those kingdom values. And he reminds Simon of those values by using the woman who came into their midst. The woman, we don't know anything about her. She doesn't even have a name in Luke's gospel. There's intimations that she's a prostitute. They call her a woman of the city and a sinner, which is sort of code for prostitute. But she may have been one of those unfortunate widows with no sons, who found herself in poverty with no way to make a living, and ends up turning to prostitution to try and keep herself alive. And she performs for Jesus all of those regular, hospitable actions that Simon should have taken care of. She washes and dries his feet. She offers him a kiss. She anoints his feet with oil. She reminds Simon of the kingdom values, the values of compassion, the values of hospitality, the values of forgiveness and love and intimacy. This woman who has no status, who's absolutely no one, is essentially teaching the rabbi about the way of God and the way of God's kingdom. And I think we often find ourselves sort of like Simon. Simon was not a bad fellow. He just found himself in some difficult places. And I think we as contemporary Christians find ourselves in those same places. I think I found it to be particular here in Southern California. Our dominant culture out there values money and status and the symbols of those status. Our homes and our cars and our clothes. The schools where kids go. Our dominant culture values climbing the ladder, even if you have to sort of shove people off the ladder to get where you want to go. Our dominant culture values those outside things that show our wealth and our power. And yet at the same time, our kingdom values, our Christian values, teach us forgiveness and love and compassion. They teach us caring for one another, reaching out for the poor. They try and teach us intimacy. And I'm not talking about the kind of intimacy that we have with our partners, but I'm talking about the kind of intimacy where we can really engage honestly and fully with one another. The kind of intimacy that was shared when the woman washed Jesus' feet. I think we experienced a little bit of that intimacy here on Maundy Thursday when we washed feet. Either me washing feet or you washing each other's feet. Because the only way to really get to know someone and understand them is to get close enough to sort of see the bumps and the warts and the places where perhaps we're not very proud of ourselves. Our culture out there does not value intimacy at all. In fact, it values us pushing each other as far away as we possibly can. And we do it really, really well. And those nice little gadgets that are in most of your pockets help a whole lot. How many times have you gone to dinner and seen a whole table full of young people? Nobody's talking, they're all texting. Texting, texting, texting. How many times have you done that? How many times have you sat down at table with your family and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I got a text. I better look right now. I better check my email. All these things that serve to push us away from one another instead of inviting us closer. It takes a woman with no status, one we don't even know her name, one who never shows up again, to remind Simon, and I think to remind us, of kingdom values, of how easy it is for us to get caught up one way or another, how easy it is for us to ignore some of the kingdom values in our pursuit of our cultural values. Because we live in both those places, all of us. We need to live in the world, and at the same time, as contemporary Christians, we are reminded to hold those kingdom values near. So I invite you to spend some time this week. Look at perhaps the places where the cultural values have maybe crouched in a little too far. Maybe it's time to bring some of those kingdom values back and remind yourself of compassion and forgiveness, of love, of intimacy, of those things that bring us together instead of pushing us apart. Amen.